And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome aboard. I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan, and this is your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook on this Sunday, September 14th, 2025. And starting out with the sea ice, we don't have much in the way of any ice coverage left along the Beaufort Sea coastline, certainly down along the Chukchi Sea coast. But I did talk with one of our ice analysts. Mike said that we are starting to see some first season ice forming, but it's well north of Utqiagvik, like 500 miles to the north, way up in the Arctic Ocean. So that's not a concern yet. We typically don't start to see the first ice form here along the Arctic coast until sometime in the early part of October. We're right near that time frame where we're at minimum ice, so that should be announced here coming up within the next week or two. We have a well-defined low here in the North Pacific, just south of the Gulf, with this occluded front wrapped around it that's going to expand north and northeastward, and there could even be the convective nature of this. You have colder air aloft, the instability is greater, so that could form a few low-topped thunderstorms. There could be some flashes, lightning, rumbles of thunder, especially on the other side here within this region as that lifts northward tomorrow. But there are also gale and even some storm force gusts associated with this front. So as that moves north and northeastward tonight and into Monday, areas of the northeastern Gulf Coast are under storm warnings, and we have along, say, off of Cape Suckling and outside between Kodiak Island and the Kenai Peninsula, there could be some gusts to 50 knots as a result of this front lifting northward. Areas of the west seeing some clearing. So it's not been too bad. A little on the cool side, certainly the early fall feel. And out to the west, we have another low here, pushing up into the southwest corner of the Bering Sea. And that low is eventually going to take an east-southeastward track and then recurve. That energy will recurve up into the Gulf as we go through mid and late week in the week ahead. So here's the low pressure on Monday afternoon, down around 988 millibars. The occluded front lifting northward up along the Gulf Coast. Some gusty winds, periods of moderate to even locally heavy rain. There's going to be some heavier rain coming into western Prince William Sound around Whittier for Monday night and on Tuesday. And there'll be another round of rain coming up in along the northeastern Gulf Coast and Panhandle for Wednesday. So some heavier rain will fall around Yakutat. So this is going to be kind of the whole pattern that sets up for the rest of the month. You're going to have these low pressures that come up out of the North Pacific, and then windy and wet conditions will pull in along the Gulf Coast at times. Meanwhile, weak high pressure is bringing quieter weather to much of the mainland, especially the western interior out toward the Bering Strait and St. Lawrence Island. For Tuesday, here comes the next low pressure impulse out in the North Pacific, curving back to the north and west. That will tend to enhance the moisture feed into western Prince William Sound later Monday night and during the day Tuesday. And as this front lifts northward too, it's going to bring that second round of moderate to locally heavy rain to areas of the Panhandle and especially northeastern Gulf Coast. Meanwhile, the low out here in the southwest corner of the Bering is going to begin to head east-southeastward. And as this secondary low tries to form, the energy from both these systems will translate up into the Gulf here for the latter half of the week ahead. So Monday, going to be windy. Panhandle, we got gusts, gale force gust here, inner channels, 35, 40 knots. Sustained winds anywhere from 20 knots Lynn Canal to 35 knot gales. Dixon Entrance. Waves building 10, 13 feet Dixon Entrance. For up north here along Lynn Canal, you can see waves 4 feet and 6 foot waves Stevens Passage. Outer coast, we're looking at southeast to east gales 40 to 45 knots, strongest out of Cross Sound there, and waves on the order of 19 to even as high as 22 feet. And then on Tuesday, still breezy, but not quite as windy. We have inner channels, 20-25 knots sustained, southeast winds gust to 35 knot gales. 4 foot waves, Lynn Canal, Stevens Passage up to 6-7 feet here, Dixon Entrance around Ketchikan, Metlakatla. Outer coast, southeast winds, 25-30 knots. Could still be some gusts, 45 knot gale force gusts here outside of Port Alexander. Waves 13-14 feet, and then easterly winds, 30 knots out of Cross Sound, 25 knots out toward Cape Suckling, 12 foot waves. For the northwestern Gulf, Cook Inlet for Monday, we have east-northeast gales to 40 knots from outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance to Kayak Island down along the eastern Kenai coast outside of Kennedy Entrance. These east-northeast gales to 40 knots, waves 15, 17 feet. Northeast winds within Prince William Sound at 20 knots, waves 4 feet. And then across Cook Inlet, we're looking at generally north winds 20 to 25 knots, waves 5 to as high as 7 to 9 feet once you get south of Anchor Point and out west of the Homer Spit. And then for Tuesday, winds will be easterly 30 knots within Prince William Sound, 6-7 foot waves there. 30 to 35 knot easterly winds outside of Hinchinbrook entrance off the eastern Kenai coast, waves 13 to 16 feet. And then across Cook Inlet, northeast winds turning northerly 25 knots as we go down the length with waves 5 to as high as 6-7 feet there, especially out and through lower Cook Inlet. Kodiak Island on Monday, we'll see on the east side 45 knot northerly gales because that low pressure center spinning out here in the southwest and western portion of the Gulf. Be tight pressure gradient there, waves up to 17 feet, 30 knot north winds, 9 foot waves Shelikof Strait, and then out along the Alaska Peninsula, east of Chiknik, 35 knot northwest gales, 6 foot waves, but the rest of the peninsula, north-northwest winds around 25 knots, and we're looking at waves 5 to 6 feet on the Bering side, 3 feet as you trail out Sandpoint to False Pass. Winds come down Tuesday, northwest winds around 20 knots, Shelikof Strait, east side of Kodiak Island, east of Chiknik, waves 4 feet, though higher east of Kodiak City. And then kind of a mixed bag of winds, 10 to 15 knots coming down along the length of the Alaska Peninsula. And for the Aleutians, northwest winds becoming variable 20 knots. The eastern Aleutians, those flip around to the south and become southeasterly. So central Aleutians Monday, Akka to Adak, south gales 35 to 40 knots, turning southeast gales 40 to 45 knots west of Adak through Kiska to Shemya with waves building upwards of 15 feet plus. And then on Tuesday, that low center is going to be just to the northeast of Shemya. So ahead of it, we expect winds southeasterly 30 knots around Dutch Harbor on Alaska, switching southwesterly 25 to as high as 35 knots north of Nikolsky. And then out toward west of Adak, Kiska and Shemya, winds are going to be southwest, turning or veering westerly 35 knot gales with waves up to 20 feet there between Kiska and Shemya. And then areas of the west coast, winds are going to be northerly first. St. Matthew down through St. Paul, variable winds at just 10 knots, waves just a couple of feet. But north winds out of Kuskokwim Bay and Bristol Bay, waves 2-3 feet there. And north winds along the lower Yukon coast and that wider expanse of Norton Sound. We're looking at waves around a few feet with north winds of 10 to 15 knots on Monday. For Tuesday, winds are going to turn easterly, the Pribilovs and St. Matthew, 25 to 30 knots, waves 8 to 11 feet there. Out of Bristol Bay, north winds 10 knots, northeast winds 15 knots out of Kuskokwim Bay. And then coming up along the lower Yukon coast and up through that wider area of Norton Sound, winds will be northerly 15 to 20 knots with 3 to 4 foot waves on Tuesday. And then as we look at the Bering Strait, kind of a mixed bag of winds. North winds 5 knots on the west side of the Seward Peninsula. As we go up through the lower Chukchi Sea, kind of variable winds, 5 to 10 knots with waves a foot or two. And then coming up along Point Delay to Utqiagvik, look for southwest winds of 10 knots, southerly winds off of Prudhoe Bay offshore, and then a light 5 knot northwest wind onshore at Kaktovik with waves no more than a foot or two. And for Tuesday, east-northeast winds, Kaktovik through Utqiagvik at 10, picking up to 15 knots. Those winds then become east-northeast 20 knots, Wainwright to Cape Lisburne with waves 3 to 4 feet, and then turn northerly 10 to 15 knots through the Bering Strait. And on the north side of St. Lawrence Island and on the west side around Wales, Port Clarence, look for northerly winds of 15 knots on Tuesday with waves of 3 feet.